We begin this hour with what may be Donald Trump's most overarching attempt at wielding the powers of the Justice Department to enact his retribution, not only on his perceived enemies, but also the highest levels of the Obama administration. On Friday, a federal grand jury in Florida approved about 30 subpoenas in a Justice Department investigation linked to the probes by the CIA and FBI into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Now, that's according to a source familiar with the matter. Those receiving subpoenas included former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Let's not forget, those probes have already been exhaustively investigated, not once, but twice, folks. Once by the Trump-appointed special counsel John Durham, and also by then Senator Marco Rubio as chairman of the Senate Select Committee. Now, you know, he has like 15 jobs in this current administration, singing a different tune. And in both cases, there was no criminal evidence found to charge Brennan, who we should note is an MSNBC analyst, or any other major figure from the CIA, FBI, or Obama administration. This latest investigation, as MSNBC understands it, is also looking at the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane probe, which, as you guys might remember, looked at whether people associated with Trump's 2016 campaign coordinated with Russia, and it is also looking at Special Counsel Jack Smith's cases against Trump. Now, if you're confused and you're asking, how does this 9-year-old CIA assessment of Russian interference in our election connects to the investigation of Trump taking classified documents to Mar-a-Lago after he left the White House?
Yeah, what is that?
Well, the theory feeds into the nearly decade-long conspiracy theory pushed by Trump and those on the far right. The Democrats and this deep state that doesn't exist have been perpetuating an ongoing conspiracy to violate Trump's civil rights by falsely portraying him as a tool of Russia and waging lawfare war against him. Lawfare against him, no war. Joining us now, Christy Greenberg, MSNBC legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, and host of Courtside with Christy Greenberg on YouTube, and Michael Feinberg, the MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst and former assistant special agent in charge with the FBI. Christy, I want to start with you. First, though, I'm going to play some sound. This is our producer, Jonathan Hellman. I always ask this for these blocks because I love it, because I think it tells you everything you need to know about this administration. This sound from Ed Martin, the head of the DOJ's weaponization group.
There are some really bad actors, some people that did some really bad things to the American people. And if they can be charged, we'll charge them. But if they can't be charged, we will name them. And we will name them. And in a culture that respects shame, they should be people that are shamed, and that's a fact. That's the way things work, and so that's how I believe the job operates.
That's not how the job operates, actually. That is actually not how you're supposed to conduct law in this country. That is not what the order in Law and Order actually means. And there will be investigations, it seems, into all of this to see if John Brennan or Peter Strzok or Lisa Page did anything wrong. All the other investigations said they have not. There was nothing there. But talk about this, what Ed Martin's saying, being the undergirding of every single thing that this administration does when it comes to law and order in this country.
Well, the one thing I agree with is he's right. People should be ashamed. He should be ashamed. He should be ashamed for how he is conducting himself. As you said, there's this thing called innocent until proven guilty, and they instead are making these statements. They get out ahead of the facts because they don't actually care, it seems, what the facts show. Instead, they have a narrative. They announce the narrative first. These people have done something really bad, and then they go from there, and then they start their investigation. And that's obviously not how it's supposed to go. You investigate first, and then you draw your conclusions. But they have these predetermined conclusions. They get up at these podiums, they announce them, and it's just, it unfortunately just contributes to, I think, people not trusting our institutions anymore because they think, oh, okay, this is just, it just seems blatantly corrupt. They are out there for a predetermined outcome, and they're going to do whatever they can and put whatever narrative out there to get it, whether or not it's supported by any evidence. It's just so wrong. It's, again, against justice manual, but I think we've thrown out the manual at this point. They've thrown out the manual. And so, you know, what is to be done about it? I think the people that are the subjects of these investigations, these constant subpoenas that have already been exhaustively investigated, convicted really need to start looking at what their legal options are, because it just seems like it's blatant harassment, blatant trying to shame them. I mean, he's out there saying it, right? We're trying to hurt people's reputation. And at some point it becomes, we are getting into slander, we are getting into defamation. This has already been looked at. There's nothing new to see here. They need to really start, I think, going on offense as well.
Yeah.
Michael, I want to ask you about some other news that broke this week from the New York Times. The Justice Department is said to be investigating D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser over a foreign trip to Qatar. I want you to put your special agent in charge investigator hat on when you're looking at this reporting that federal prosecutors have opened a corruption investigation examining a foreign trip she took with members of her staff that was paid for by Qatar. There are also questions about the strength of the case. It's unclear whether the mayor's office did anything for the Qatari government, which would be a critical element of possible bribery accusation. But let's say you are investigating this hypothetically. In what world would you be investigating Bowser for these potential accusations of bribery, but not Trump accepting a $400 million jet from Qatar?
Used jet.
Used jet.
Well, in any investigative world that valued integrity and consistency, you would be looking at both of them equally. You know, I worked in counterintelligence for the overwhelming majority of my career, and I'll confess that it really was an evergreen concern of ours when state and local officials would go to foreign countries and meet with those countries' governments, simply for the reason that they often don't have the same sort of training in knowing to recognize an influence operation or a potential bribery scheme that members of the federal government know just through their regular dealings with the intelligence community and law enforcement officials. Now, that said, we have not been made privy to any facts indicating that anything like that occurred with Bowser's administration, and we would be negligent if we didn't note that the U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. explicitly stated that Mayor Bowser herself is not under any sort of investigation. So we do have some contradictory reporting here, and I fear we're just going to need to get a few more facts before we know whether this is something we should hold our breath on before commenting, or if this is the typical Trump administration targeting of Democratic government officials.
Well, Chris, I want to pick up on something you were saying earlier about, the administration is narrative first, predetermined conclusions. Is there, I'm wondering if there's evidence of pushback to what the administration is doing. Actually, I'm asking a question that's, as an attorney, you would know is called a leading question, counselor, because I do think, and I would like to get your thoughts on this. I do think we have two pieces of evidence this week that there is pushback. First, on Wednesday, NBC News had the headline, Judge accuses prosecutors in the James Comey case of taking an indict first, investigate later approach. And then on Thursday, another NBC story. This one, jury acquits D.C. sandwich guy charged with chucking a sub at a federal agent. So on the one hand, you've got a judge who's saying, you guys are basically coming in here and making this stuff up and trying to get a prosecution for prosecution's sake. And then on the other part of the justice system, you have a jury that's presented evidence, and they're like, no, not only are we not going to indict the guy at the federal level, but we're not even going to convict him at the misdemeanor level.
Right. So you definitely are seeing pushback. I think with respect to the Comey case, you are seeing the judges be very skeptical about how these cases are being presented. It was a very bare bones indictment. You have a vindictive prosecution motion from Comey that is still outstanding. The government responded to that this week. And, to Eugene's point earlier, they pointed to Donald Trump's post where he said Comey is guilty as hell as evidence of a legitimate prosecutorial motive. So once again, no, it's not, right? Like, no, it's not. The president, somebody's not guilty because the president says so. They're guilty because there is evidence that would suggest that you need to convict him. I mean, it is outrageous that the government is taking a position like that in court. They also took the position that the president has no personal animus toward Comey, which is just, I mean, he's called him sick, the worst human being in the country has been exposed to. I mean, every kind of awful thing you can say. And it's just, again, you're seeing these filings. I mean, it may have been the worst legal brief I've ever read because it was just completely devoid of any facts. And again, that may work for spin, in a media hit, but it doesn't work when you actually have to go in court and defend it. And so
but it's still hard to meet the bar to actually have a case dismissed on the grounds of vindictive prosecution, right? I mean, do these posts meet the bar?
Well, again, the bar is you have to show one personal animus, which, again, I would argue is there.
Yeah.
Then that has to be imputed to the U.S. attorney. She's not, and she is arguing, I acted on my own independent judgment. Does anybody think that Lindsay Halligan was appointed to this position? They fired the career prosecutor who said, no, I'm not going to prosecute Comey. They brought her in, an insurance lawyer with no prosecutorial experience for her independent judgment? Of course not. Of course not.
Correct.
So again, can you impute that animus to her? I think absolutely you can. And then the question is, was this based on the facts and the law? She got the case on a Monday, and then she brought it into the grand jury by Thursday. 3 days to review all of the evidence, to review all of the law, and make a presentation to the grand jury that she has never made before. There's no way. It's not possible. So I do think they will be successful on that motion.
Mike, I want to bring you in because something you said made me think of this. When you're talking about, kind of holding our breath and waiting to see what the facts lead, 100% agree with you. We're reporters here. But when it comes to the legal process, when you look at the judges, when you look at these juries, are they going to be able to separate kind of the retribution campaign that Trump promised and everything that's happening, right? It feels like everything's tainted. Was the fruit of the poisonous tree? It feels like everything is tainted by him saying, I will be your retribution from the campaign until now.
Yeah, I don't think judges and jury are going to be able to separate the two. And quite frankly, I don't think they should. Whether the president is interfering in prosecutorial decisions and demanding that investigations be spun up is a legitimate factor in evaluating the integrity of the resulting charges.
The judges. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. After years of chaos, it wasn't a revolution, an election, or a protest that finally cornered Trump. It was the one thing he'd always treated as irrelevant: the law. For a man who lived his entire life bending rules, buying silence, and suing his way out of trouble, being told no was more than defeat. It was exposure. He thought the courts would protect him. After all, he'd stacked them himself. But the thing about power is that it believes its own myth until reality breaks through. One by one, judges, even the ones he'd handpicked, started ruling against him. They quoted the Constitution instead of cable news. They treated him not like a king, but like a defendant. And suddenly, the showman ran out of stage. That's when the rage began. He attacked them all, called them corrupt, biased, enemies of the people. But the truth is, he wasn't afraid of injustice. He was afraid of accountability. Because accountability doesn't bend to charm or threat. It's cold, procedural, boring, and unstoppable. It's the one thing that can't be bullied. Every courtroom became a mirror he couldn't break. Every ruling stripped away the myth he'd sold, that power makes you untouchable. And as the verdicts rolled in, civil, criminal, financial, America got to see something it hadn't seen in years. A system remembering what it was built for. Maybe that's why it mattered. Not because the judges were heroes. They weren't. They were just doing their jobs. But that's exactly what made it powerful. In an age of noise and spectacle, professionalism became rebellion. Integrity became resistance. And in those quiet moments, as gavels fell and lawyers argued, democracy found its pulse again. Trump always believed he could rewrite reality if he shouted loud enough. But law doesn't listen to volume. It listens to evidence. And when the shouting stopped, what was left were documents, signatures, and truths that didn't care about politics. That's how power ends, not in flames, but in paperwork. And maybe that's the final irony. The man who built his empire on television was finally undone by transcripts.